All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this month's safety training. I'm Shanda Queener with Keller Group, and this is Jason Pierce with TIS. And we are doing our training on hazardous materials. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pierce.
Good afternoon. This is DOT Hazmat training, even though it says Hazmat drivers. This training is for everybody at KelSan in regards to the safe transportation of hazard materials. So anybody that touches any function or piece of the shipment process must go through this training. If you answer the phone and you take an order, that is part of the function of the shipment of safe transportation, as well as if you are the salesperson that's making that order. So we push this through the entirety of KelSan. As Casey said, this is a 3-year window for this training, but we try to incorporate in every year. So video test afterwards. It's about 15 minutes, I think, on the video. We're going to stop it when it gets to one point, and then we'll go through the test.
Transporting hazardous materials is serious business. As a driver who hauls hazardous materials for a living, you have an important role, and it's critical to the safety and security of the hazardous materials transportation process that you know and understand what's required and be trained to get the job done right. Everyone knows that hazardous materials are very important to us. We need them to fuel our cars, to heat our homes, to make many of the products we use every day. But hauling hazardous materials, or hazmat, is not an easy job. If something goes wrong on the road, the consequences can be devastating. There can be loss of life, damage to the environment, cleanup costs, not to mention fines and possible jail time. So it's your responsibility to make sure the hazmat you haul arrives safely and securely at its destination. Are you up to it? Let's review the requirements to see that you are. Hazardous materials are categorized into 9 hazard classes, most of which are further broken down into divisions. Divisions provide more detail about the material's hazards. For example, Class 2, gases, has 3 divisions. 2.1 is flammable gas, 2.2 is non-flammable compressed gas, and 2.3 is poison gas. Depending on the hazard class, some materials are further divided into packing groups. Group 1 indicates great danger, Group 2, medium danger, and Group 3, minor danger. Some hazard classes do not have packing groups. These include Class 2, gases, Class 7, radioactive, ORMD materials, some Class 9, miscellaneous hazardous materials, and some Division 6.2, infectious substances. In addition to showing a level of danger involved, the packing group is used to determine what type of packaging is required. All of this information, hazard class, division, and packing group, can be found in the Hazardous Materials Table, located in the Hazardous Materials Regulations, or HMR. Hazardous Materials, or Hazmat Table, is a list of all the proper shipping names which can be used to describe materials transported in the U.S. and provides essential information and guidelines on how they must be shipped. The Hazmat Table also lists the hazard class or division, UN or NA identification number, the packing group, required labels, and special provisions that correspond with each proper shipping name. Other columns of the table provide HMR section references for packaging information and maximum quantities for shipping by air and rail. 2 fundamental appendices used with the Hazmat Table are Appendix A and Appendix B. Appendix A lists materials that present an environmental hazard when shipped in certain quantities. These are referred to as hazardous substances and have reportable quantities, or RQs. Materials that could harm the marine environment when transported by ship are listed in Appendix B and are referred to as marine pollutants.
True or false? The hazardous materials table lists all of the proper shipping names that can be used to transport hazmat in the U.S. True. The table also provides important information and guidelines on how a hazardous material must be shipped. True or false? The hazardous materials table has 2 appendices. True. Appendix A lists hazardous substances that may present an environmental hazard when transported in certain quantities. Appendix B lists materials that are considered marine pollutants.
As a driver, you may have little, if any, contact with the hazmat table. However, most of the key information on your shipping papers and packages is obtained from it. Proper documentation of hazardous materials is critical. In order for a hazardous material to be safely transported, it must be completely and properly described on the shipping papers, if shipping papers are required. For most shipments, properly prepared shipping papers include the basic description of the hazardous material. The items that make up the basic description must appear in this order: the UN or NA identification number, proper shipping name, hazard class or division, subsidiary hazard class or division in parentheses, and packing group. This information can be found in columns 2 through 6 of the hazmat table. The total quantity of the hazardous material is required on the shipping paper, as well as the number and type of packages. If a load consists of both hazardous and non-hazardous materials, the hazardous materials must stand out on the shipping paper. The shipper may do this by either listing the hazardous materials first, by listing them in contrasting color, or by inserting an X, or if appropriate, RQ in the column designated HM for hazardous materials. In most cases, shipping papers must also contain the shipper's certification. This simply states that the shipment is properly classed, packed, marked, labeled, and placarded, and is in proper condition for transportation. An emergency response phone number must be listed on the shipping papers as well, for most hazardous materials.
True or false? In most cases, a shipping paper must contain the shipper's certification. True. The shipper's certification states that a material has been properly prepared for transportation according to HMR requirements.
While it's the shipper's responsibility to prepare the shipping papers, drivers and everyone else who will handle the hazardous material shipment must know how to read them. One area you should pay particular attention to is the emergency response information requirements. At a minimum, you should receive a description of the hazardous material, the immediate health hazards, fire or explosion risks, immediate precautions to take in the event of an incident, how to handle a fire, how to handle a spill or leak, and preliminary first aid measures. The shipper may list this information on the shipping papers, or it may be provided to you via the Emergency Response Guidebook, or by attaching a Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, that contains all the required information. Shipping papers must be readily available at all times in case of an emergency or roadside inspection. This means they must be visible and within reach while you're restrained by your seatbelt. When you're out of the cab, display shipping papers in a door pouch or lay them on the driver's seat.
True or false? The Emergency Response Guidebook is the only acceptable way to provide the necessary emergency response information. False. A material safety data sheet, MSDS, can also be used, provided it contains all of the required emergency response information. True or false? Shipping papers must be readily available at all times. True. They must be visible and within reach while a driver is restrained by a seatbelt.
How a material is packaged and marked is a significant aspect of transporting hazardous materials safely. Non-bulk hazardous materials are generally shipped in what's called performance-oriented packaging, POP, or UN packaging. The standards for this kind of packaging are quite stringent, which make it very unlikely that a hazmat package will leak during transportation. You'll see the manufacturer's UN mark on these types of packages. This indicates that the package conforms to United Nations standards. On most non-bulk packages, the shipper must display a proper shipping name, ID number, and the name and address of the shipper or receiver. Other markings that you may see include this side up arrows, ORMD, which stands for Other Regulated Materials and represents a consumer commodity, and marine pollutant. All package markings must be clearly visible and printed in English. Markings must be in a contrasting color and printed on the package or attached to the surface in the form of a label, sign, or tag. They must also be placed apart from other package markings that could substantially reduce their effectiveness, such as advertising. On bulk packages, the material's ID number must be displayed certain ways. If a bulk container holds less than 1,000 gallons, the ID number must be marked on two opposite sides. If the container holds 1,000 gallons or more, the ID number must be marked on both sides and both ends. The ID number marking can be printed in black on an orange panel, displayed across the center of the primary hazard placard, or on a plain white square-on-point configuration the same size as a placard. Generally, when a bulk package, such as a portable tank or cargo tank, is transported, the ID number for the hazardous material it contains must be marked on all four sides of the package, or in some cases, on the transport vehicle. As you can see by the different ID marking requirements, how a hazardous material is packaged and marked is critical to its safe transport.
True or false? On most non-bulk packages, the shipper must display a proper shipping name, ID number, and address of the shipper or receiver. True. The way a material is packaged and marked is an important part of the hazmat transportation process. True or false? All package markings must be clearly visible and printed in English. True. Markings must also be in a contrasting color and printed on the package or attached to the surface in the form of a label, sign, or tag.
Hazard warning labels, which provide an immediate warning of the hazards involved, are required on most non-bulk packages. It's the shipper's responsibility to select and attach the proper labels. It's your responsibility to make sure they're correct. Some materials have more than one label because they present multiple hazards. Labels are placed on the surface of a package near the shipping name. If the package is smaller than the label, or if it's a cylinder or an odd shape, a label may be placed on a tag that is securely attached to the package. Hazard warning labels must be clearly visible so they're not confused with other package markings. The regulations state that you shouldn't accept a hazardous material shipment unless the required labels are affixed to the packages being shipped. As with markings and placards, labels can help you identify a hazmat shipment and the hazards it presents.
True or false? Hazard warning labels are required on all hazmat packagings. False. Generally, labels are required on most non-bulk packagings of hazardous materials. True or false? Some hazmat packagings require more than one label. True. Some hazardous materials present more than one hazard in transportation, and multiple labels may be required.
Placards are similar to labels in that they also serve as a hazard warning. They must be displayed on each side and each end of bulk packages and transport vehicles. At the scene of an accident or incident, placards help emergency response teams identify what types of hazardous materials are present in the transport vehicle or freight container, so they know the appropriate action to take to keep the public safe from harm. The required placards can be found in one of two placard tables in the hazardous materials regulations. Table 1 lists the categories of materials that require placards regardless of what quantity is being transported. Table 2 lists the categories of materials that must be placarded if the gross weight of all Table 2 materials being transported in non-bulk packages equals or exceeds 1,001 pounds. Note that if two or more categories of materials from Table 2 are shipped together, a dangerous placard may be used instead of several individual placards. However, if one of these categories of materials weighs 2,205 pounds or more and is loaded at one location, the placard specified in Table 2 for that category must be used, and separate placards must be used for any other categories which may be present. And certain materials with more than one hazard must be placarded to show multiple hazards. While there are specific standards for the size, color, and design of placards, the most important and obvious requirement is visibility. A placard must be clearly visible from the direction it faces and must be securely attached to the vehicle or container. As a driver, it's your responsibility to display the placards you're given and to make sure that the correct placards for the hazardous materials you're transporting. Generally, placards must be left in place until the container is cleaned and purged of any hazardous material.
True or false? Required placards for a hazmat can be found in one of two tables in the Hazardous Materials Regulations. True. Table 1 lists hazmat that requires placards for any amount. Table 2 lists materials that must be placarded if the hazmat is in non-bulk packagings and weighs 1,001 pounds or more. True or false? Placards should be removed as soon as your vehicle is unloaded. False. Generally, bulk containers must first be cleaned and purged to remove any hazard that still might be present in transportation.
There are a number of steps you must observe in getting a hazmat load ready for shipment. Be sure to always set your parking brake and chock your wheels before loading or unloading to prevent the vehicle from moving. Packages of hazardous materials must be secured to prevent shifting, including relative motion between packages during transport. Whenever a cargo tank is loaded or unloaded, the regulations require that a qualified person be present. This means someone who is knowledgeable about the material being loaded or unloaded, knows what to do in an emergency situation, and is authorized and has the means to move the cargo tank if necessary. It's critical during loading that you, as a driver, know what materials can be shipped together, especially if you need to transport a mixed load, because some materials cannot be loaded together. This is where the hazardous materials load and segregation requirements come into play. Most of these requirements are presented in the Hazmat segregation table. This table helps you determine which materials can be loaded, shipped, and stored together. It's easy to read and use. An X indicates that materials cannot be loaded and stored together. An O indicates that they cannot be loaded together unless they're separated to prevent the materials from mixing in the event of an accident or incident. And if the space is blank, it means that no restrictions apply.
True or false? An X in the Hazmat segregation table means no restrictions apply. False. An X indicates that materials cannot be loaded and transported together. A blank space means no restrictions apply. True or false? An O in the Hazmat segregation table indicates that materials cannot be loaded together unless they are separated to prevent mixing if an accident or incident occurs. True. It's important to be able to correctly use the Hazmat segregation table because it helps you determine which materials can be loaded, shipped, and stored together.
Okay, guys, again, I know that video was directed at drivers, however, most everything pertained to you other than a few pieces of it, so. Thank you, guys. Please finish the test and have a great day.
Oh,
Huh?
once the tests have been completed, please scan and email the entire test or get them in through intercompany mail, whatever you need to do, but send them all to Casey Long here in Knoxville. Thank you.